Hey, hi, hello, it's me, Schleim, and we're back with another MCreator tutorial. This time about how to make your own custom blocks and ores, and some of the features that you might be able to tag to said blocks and ores. So let's just jump straight into it. First thing you're going to want to do is go up to the plus, and we want block. The block item is where you're going to be able to make all of your standard blocks, functional blocks, storage blocks, crafting tables, and ores that you're going to use all throughout your mod. So let's call this iridium ore, because we're just gonna start with an ore. Here on the first page, you got your block type of model. So you could do normal, single texture, a cross model. So that would be things like poppies, dandelions, all types of different flowers, crops, so similar to wheat and such, or grass. Get different types of models, but for an ore, we're just going to go with single texture because we only need one texture to be duplicated across all faces. Next, we have our texture that we want to import. Let's import tutorial mod textures, and right here, there is my iridium ore. Okay, next is your block base, model and behavior, and optional textures. The block base allows you to choose like what shape generally used off a pre-established set. So you could choose stairs, and it will allow you to much more easily create a stair block. Works for all of the things, giving any prerequisites it might need for any of the specific blocks. The block item texture, this is useful for how you want the item to be rendered in your inventory if you have, say, a custom 3D model that you have imported. For said block, you could import a standardized little 16 by 16 texture into there, or you could just leave it and allow it to render itself into the hotbar. The block particle texture, that's if you want to change or replace the particles that spawn as you break the block. Next is the rotation and waterlog block states. The block rotation allows you to choose many different ways that you want the block to be rotated. Do you want it to rotate on the y-axis facing southwest northeast? And that's rotating it based on the player. Then there is the rotation for facing all directions, down, up, north, south, west, east, rotation from player, and then y-axis from the block face, and then your all directions based off block face. Or it even has the option for rotating like a log would. Different rotation options based on how you want your block to function when placed. The pitch rotation is used for horizontally rotating blocks, useful for things like lever, grindstone, other things like that. Last is the block waterloggable. You should know what waterloggable is. Next is the visual render settings. Does your block have any transparent parts? So do you have holes in your texture? Yes or no? You do, you want to enable this, and then you want to choose the transparency type. Do you want it to still function as solid? Do you want it to cut out the transparency? I don't fully understand the different processes in this because I have made very few transparent blocks in my time. I've mostly used cutout, and it's always worked for me. The hide the fluid texture when submerged is part of the waterloggable status. It allows you to where even if it is waterlogged, you do not see the water inside of it. Next is, do you want the block to be tintable? So things like grass, the foliage, water, things that allow it to change its color based on region of the world that it happened to spawn in, be it temperature, so on and so forth. Kind of like how you can have different colors of leaves depending on where you place down the leaves. Next is just a little checkbox if you want the item to also change its tint color in your inventory instead of just when you place it. Next is special information, which is exactly the same as when you make an item, which just allows you to add extra little tooltips to your respective block. Okay, and next is the bounding box. Just your standard full block. Bounding box is not going to be necessarily useful for you because it, again, just a default 16 by 16 block. But if you have a fancier block model and you import it, this can typically automatically generate all of the required hitboxes and bounding boxes that you would need to effectively have the shape of the block as the hitbox instead of having a full block. Importing a fancy model, so something say like an anvil, you import that type of block model, this will automatically divide everything down into its respective bounding boxes to make it to where the hitbox or bounding box of the anvil, where it's tied to the individual shapes of the anvil instead of just having one big 16 by 16 block surround something that doesn't necessarily need the whole box. And next is block states. Block states allows you to effectively define extra little bits of information that you might necessarily need in order to help modify or change the look of your respective block. You can add pre-existing ones, such as a bookshelf slot number occupy, conditions, disarmed falling, does it have a bottle in it, its growth age, so on and so forth. It allows you to add any existing property that you might want to change that affects the block state, or you can add a custom property of your own if the block you are making requires it. Next, we're on to properties. In the properties is where you can set the in-game name, the creative tab in which you want your block to spawn. We'll put our ore into natural blocks. Next, you can set your hardness, which is how long the block will take to mine. I tend to leave most things at 1. Certain ores I will sometimes increase or decrease this value depending on how I want the ore to feel and function. The resistance is how resistant it is to explosions, or the lack of resistance it has to explosions. Next is slipperiness, which just allows you to make slippery blocks like ice, or like non-slippery blocks if you wanted to make something like, say, tar. Next is the jump factor, which determines how much or how high you can jump off of that block. So you can lower this number if you want to make blocks like stickier so you can't jump as high off of it like honey, or if you want to effectively make a jump booster block, you can crank this up to where when you jump on it, it makes you jump significantly higher. Next is the speed factor. The speed factor allows you to increase or decrease the movement speed when moving over this block. The luminance value allows you to set how bright you want the block to glow, if you want it to glow at all. So this would be used for if you want to make something like a shroom light, glowstone, or any other type of block that you want to emit light. Light opacity. Light opacity is something you would make if you have like a transparent block, so say glass, where you want it to allow light in. The light opacity determines how much light a block blocks from passing through it. The first of 4 checkboxes is deciding if the block has gravity. So if you want it to function like gravel and or sand, concrete powder, it will allow it to fall when there is no supporting block underneath. Second checkbox is whether or not you can walk through the block. This is useful for things like vines, tall grass, anything that you necessarily don't want to have block player or mob movement. Next is enabling emissive rendering with a glow, so similar to the magma block. And the final checkbox in the general properties section is the is replaceable. This determines whether or not, if you say try to place another block on top of it, if it will override it or place it on top of said block. This is useful for if you're trying to make just standard plant life for your world and you want it to where the player can just place over it without having to effectively break it. Next is the legacy material section, a spot I have yet to actually use because it doesn't have anything I necessarily need in it, and reading the little tooltip for it isn't the most helpful because it says if you're using a block for ore, select the rock material. Yeah, that is not necessary because that is not in our list here. So again, legacy material, it's something I don't really think you need to use. Now we're on to the dropping properties. First set is the custom drop. If you want it to drop a specific item when broken, but because we are doing an ore, we're not going to worry about this right now. How much you want it to drop. Again, we're not worried about this for now. The one we actually want to use, and it's the way that vanilla Minecraft does all of its ores, is using a custom loot table for drops. When you click that, it will disable both of these, and then you just got to create a loot table with the name of your respective block. The creative pick item is if you want it to, when you do the pick block in creative mode, what it'll give you. So say you have a crop that is growing and you do pick block on it, you can have it to where it gives you that particular plant's seeds instead of that block state. The second checkbox here is requiring the correct tool for drops. So if you have an ore and you want it only mineable with a pickaxe, you enable this, so that way there it can only give you drops if you use that correct tool, being a pickaxe. And right below that is where you choose the specified tool that you want. You could do not specified, pickaxe, axe, shovel, hoe. I tend to do pickaxe for, ores, because what else would you really want to use to mine ores? Unless it's like a sandy ore or something, but regardless, you can do pickaxe. Next gives you your vanilla tool tiers. Gives you all the standard tiers of tools that you would have in Minecraft, so your stone, iron, and diamond, or you could have it to where it doesn't require, so you could even mine it with a wooden pickaxe. So for our iridium ore, let's go with iron tiers. So you need at least iron mining tools or higher. Is the block unbreakable? We're making an ore. We don't need to make the block invincible, but this is useful if you're trying to make something that is similar to, say, bedrock. Next is one of my favorite conditional overrides in all of MCreator, which is the additional harvest condition. This would allow you to effectively create your own tool tiers, allow you to check if you are harvesting with a custom tool instead of one of the 4 vanilla tool types. Gives you all kinds of extra control over the checks you want done to check if something can be harvested. And when you have additional harvest conditions set, you have to meet tool able to destroy it, vanilla tool tier, and additional harvest condition. You would have to meet all of them. So if you only want the additional harvest condition, you would do not specified, no vanilla tool tier, and then set your additional harvest condition. I will go on a smaller tutorial on how to set up conditions or any condition within MCreator, because conditions are used in quite a number of spots and they can be a little tricky to use and understand for your first couple times. And the last thing on the properties page is your sound properties. Do you want to use a vanilla sound set, which we're doing in ore, so we can just set this to stone. Make it super easy. But if you're making something that you want an entirely custom sound set to, you can do custom sounds, set the break, fall, hit, place, and step sounds. But for now, we'll just stick with the vanilla sound set. And moving on to the next tab, we have the advanced properties. In the advanced properties, you can set the tick rate of your particular block. So if we set it to 20, it will tick once per second. The next one is also to do with the ticks, which is useful for things like crops and that, where it'll tick randomly, which it'll function under the global tick rule, the same way that sugarcane, cactus, wheat, any form of crop works, where it'll just randomly tick every once in a while. Next is the block color on map. This here allows you to set the color that it'll show up on a vanilla Minecraft map. I tend to just leave it as default because I never think this far ahead. Next is the plants can sustain on this block. So this is useful for things like dirt and that, anything that you want plant life to be able to grow on. The beacon color modifier works the same way as glass over top of a beacon, allows you to change or modify the color of a beacon beam. The next check mark is, do you want your block to function as a ladder? Next is the enchantment power bonus. This here allows you to set a enchanting power for your block, which effectively allows you to use the block as a substitute for a bookshelf in an enchanting setup. The block flammability lets you set how long it takes for a particular block to burn and be destroyed by fire. The fire spreading speed allows you to set how fast you want it to spread fire to neighboring blocks. If you leave it at 0, it'll allow the vanilla system to handle that. Reaction to being pushed allows you to choose how you want the block to behave when it is pushed by a piston. You can have it as normal function, destroy it, stop pushing, so like function like obsidian, where it can only be pushed, or just ignore the block. The AI path node allows you to choose how the AI interacts with said block. Do you want it to block, them to walk on it, a walkable door, fence, so on and so forth, allowing the AI to know how it is to interact with said block. The random model offset allows you to effectively make it to where the model can spawn anywhere within a block. So think like when you're planting flowers in vanilla Minecraft, how they're kind of not always in the center of the block, they're kind of offset randomly. This is what you would use for that. And next is our condition for valid block placement. This will determine whether or not you can place a block there. Note that this will not affect the block on world generation, but if the block receives a tick update in an invalid location, it will destroy. Next is the redstone properties. So the first checkbox is, do you want redstone to directly connect to this block? Does it emit redstone itself? So will it actually provide redstone power. And next we have another condition statement, which allows you to effectively set how you want or what kind of power you want your block to output. So if it has, say, this condition met, it is going to output this power level, or this condition is met, it'll output this signal strength. And the last section of the advanced properties is the bone meal properties. Do you want the block to be directly fertilized by bone meal, so useful for crops? And then we have three conditionals. One is a check on whether or not it meets the requirements for you to be able to bone meal. The next conditional is for a success, so what you want it to do when it is successful and if it meets the requirements to be successful. And then you have what you want to actually happen when the bone meal is actually successfully used on your respective block. I am not 100% on my descriptions on these three for the sheer fact of I've not yet actually toyed around with the bone meal properties because I don't typically make crops. Next, we're moving on to block entities. Block entities are things like chests, crafting tables, smithing table, furnace, anything that needs to store and use its own data. So if you want it to function like that, you would enable it, but we don't need it for ore, so we're not going to enable it for now. But it also allows you to bind a specific GUI to said container. So when you right click the block, it will open, say, a chest inventory, a custom crafting grid, or any other thing that you want to set up there. The next is a checkbox, is if you want it to actually open said GUI when you right click it. The size of the inventory is how many slots you want within your entity or crafting table or whatever, plus one extra slot. I don't know why it requires that, but it does say that it will just do it with one extra slot, so I tend to always do it. So if, say, you're making your own vanilla crafting table, for example, you would want your 9 input slots, 1 output slot, or however many input slots. You would take that many slots, add 1, and that is what you would want the size of inventory slot count to be. Max stack size allows you to set how big of the stack of any item each slot can hold. Next, do you want it to drop the items that it's stored when you break the block? Enable block output comparator data. So do you want it to be able to output how full it is? You can then, in the next two, you can set what slot IDs you do not want to take items from or allow the inserting of items into. Next, we have two conditionals, which allows for the automation of taking and inserting items into your inventory, be it with hoppers or third-party automation mods. This one, I don't quite know how it would fully function. Next is the energy and fluid storage. This here is if you want to make, say, a giant RF battery bank or a fluid tank. So in energy storage, would you like to enable it? Not necessary for an ore block. How much energy do you want it to start with? What's the max amount of energy it can hold? And how much can it receive? And how much can it extract? Fluid, again, click to enable. How much fluid do you want it to hold? And do you want to restrict what type of fluids it can actually hold? Next is our trigger tab. Next in the triggers tab, we have the on block right click. This here is what you want to happen when you right click on the block. When the block is added, it allows you to run a certain procedure whenever the block is added to the world. Next is the neighbor block changes. So this allows you to detect if the block beside it changed and what you want this particular block to do. Be it update MBT data, get a tick update, so if it needs to break itself because it no longer has its required block beside it, so on, so forth. Next is the on tick update. This here is the procedure that'll be called every time you have a tick update to the block. So be it whether you have it on the random tick option or if you have it set to ticking once every second or however many ticks, this is the procedure that will be called when block tick happens. Next is block destroyed by player. So this is what you want to happen, say, if the player breaks the block. So say you want an ore that when you break it, it explodes. This is where you would put said procedure. Next is block destroyed by an explosion. So if you want a block to only be mineable through explosions, this is where you would put it. Or if a block detects an explosion with it or is damaged or destroyed by an explosion, it can cause another explosion leading to, let's say, a chain reaction of explosions. Next is the one player starts to destroy. This is what you call if you want to say say apply some effects to the player when they start trying to destroy the block, or anything else that you might want. This next one is for when an entity is inside the bounding box. So this is for something like, say, a cobweb, where once you're inside of it, it will slow you down. When entity walks on the block, again, is a procedure that if a player or another mob or entity steps on top of the block, this will happen. So say you want it to where they step on it, it applies, say, a jump boost 30 potion effect to them just for stepping on the block. Could probably be more creative with this one than that. Next is on block hit by projectile. So this is effectively the same type of thing that a target block hits. So if you shoot an arrow at it, you could set it to output a redstone signal, or launch a firework into the sky, or spawn some particles showing, hey, you hit me. When block is placed, this is what you call when you only want something to happen when a player places the block into the world. It is a bit different than block added. Block added can be from like natural terrain generation, or the spawning in of a structure that has said block. It can proc there. Where when the block is placed, this will only happen when a player or entity actively places the block into the world. So be it an enderman placing the block back down on the ground after picking it up, or the player placing it to build something. The next two, redstone on and redstone off, that is what you want to happen when, again, power it with redstone, and then when you stop powering with redstone. So this would be useful for things like pistons. You want it to extend when you power it and retract when you depower it. And then the on random client tick display, this is only going to happen on the player side, so it is useful for only like visual effects. So if you want your ore to just randomly like send out little sparkly particles, this is where it'll be, so it only displays on the player's client instead of having to also be processed on server side. And now we move on to the most important part for creating your own custom ore, the generation tab. So in the generation tab, one of the things you will want to keep in note is the dimension that you are trying to have the ore spawn in. You have to remember to stay within the ore generation boundaries of that world. So say for the overworld, you want to remain, as the image on the side implies, -64 and 320. Whereas in the nether, you want to remain between 0 and 128. And the end, I believe, is about the same, 0 to 128. If you go outside those boundaries for where you want the ore to spawn, there's a good chance it will not spawn. So if you want the ore to generate, you just need to click this, and it'll just automatically start using all these parameters to determine how the ore is going to generate within your world. Next is the types of blocks that your ore can replace, because the ores don't just kind of spawn in. They need to have a particular block in which they are to replace. The default tag is stone ore replaceables, which is anything that is within this tag, so which is typically just stone, will be able to be replaced by this block. You can also add your own blocks to it, so if you have your own custom dimension, you can add the stone variant from that particular dimension, or if you want it to only be able to replace, say, diamond ore, you set that here so your ore can only spawn where it can replace that block in that spot. Next is biome restrictions. If you leave it empty, there won't be any restrictions. Your ore can spawn anywhere. If you add biomes to this list, your ore can only spawn within that particular biome. So if you set this to be, say, Minecraft plains, your ore will only spawn within the plains biome. Or if you want it to only spawn within dripstone caves, or within the lush caves, or within the deep dark, this is where you would add that particular restriction. You choose what biomes you want it to generate in, and it will only generate in those. You leave it empty, there's no restrictions, it can spawn anywhere and everywhere. Next is your ore generation shape. Next is the generation shape. And the generation shape is how you want the ore distribution to be. Uniform is it'll be effectively rectangular in its distribution, so it'll always have the same amount of ore distribution from your maximal height to your minimal height. Triangular generation shape, think of it as a like diamond shape. At the maximum height, it'll have the least, and at the minimum height, it will have the least. But right in the middle of your minimal and maximum heights is where you're going to have the largest density of ore. Next is your average amount of ore groups per chunk. So in every chunk, how many groups of ore do you want? So at the current number of 10, every 16 by 16 chunk will have 10 groups on average of ore within it. The average number of ores in a group, this is how many ores you want in the vein on average. So if you want to have large veins like coal, you could have that as a higher number so you get more ore per vein. Or if you want it to be like an exceedingly rare resource with low amounts that you can get, like ancient debris, you can set it really low and it'll generate with less ore per vein. And lastly on this page is your generation height. What is the minimum Y level that you want the ore to generate, and what is the maximum do you want your ore to spawn at? So let us enable this. We'll let it replace stone. We'll have no restriction. Uniform, we'll leave these two settings default to make it easier to find our ore in when we go check it out. And we want this to spawn between -64 and 128. So let us save this and let us open Minecraft to go hunt our iridium ore. Okay, now that we are within Minecraft, what we're going to want to do to make finding our ore a little bit easier is create a whole new world. This world, we will be able to find the ore. We're just going to have to venture far away from anywhere we have already been. So I find creating a new world just to test your generation and see if it is working correctly of your new ore. I always create a new world just to test it. Sometimes if I'm making modifications to the ore, I will continue to use the same world, but just continually fly in a straight line. Okay, so from here, we want to hop into spectator mode because I find it is the easiest to find your ore. So let's go underground and let's go look for our iridium. We want to look for larger open caves because that should make finding it a lot easier. Ah, look at that. Already found it. Right there is our iridium. So let me give dev night vision infinite. There we go. Change everything over to peaceful. So here's our ore. Hop back into creative. Let's grab ourselves some pickaxes. So we will grab wood, stone, iron, diamond, and netherite. So actually let's now go to survival. So this is our ore that we have added to the game. We could mine stone, wooden pickaxe. Gonna take a hot minute, and we don't get anything because we do not meet the mining requirement. Stone should work because it is able to mine iron. No, never mind. Okay, so it does require an active iron pick. Oh wait, actually no, I'm pretty sure I actually disabled this. Yes, I did. Let me go fix that. Okay, I'm back. I have fixed the problem. I forgot to re-add the specified tool and mining level. So stone, not work. Iron pickaxe will work. I just didn't set it to drop any ore. Same with diamond and netherite. Oh, that is how you get your ore to generate in the world. Now let us go add a loot table to this ore so it can actively drop us the iridium ore that we want. Okay, now that we are back within MCreator, let us add the loot table so that way there we can actually generate our ore. First, we're going to want the actual ore item itself. So we're going to quickly go create a new item. You can click item here or hit I on the keyboard. Let's just name it raw iridium. Let us import a texture, import my terrible texture for this since I didn't put any effort into it. It is literally just recolored iron ore. Leave all that default. We don't need anything else. Yep, nothing else is needed within all of this. We'll actually do property. We'll change its rarity to uncommon, and let's just add it to ingredients. I think that's where they go. Other than that, everything else could stay the same. There we go. We have created our raw iridium. I will go more in depth about creating items in a future tutorial if I haven't already. I actually do not remember what tutorials I have already made. So yes, I have not created a full items tutorial for making more specific items rather than just tools, or less specific items instead of just tools. So I will be covering that in a following tutorial. So you have your item that you want to add to your loot pool. So let us add a new loot pool. So for that, you're going to want to either hit L or find loot table. Here, you're going to want to name it something to help you keep track of what it is. So I always tend to go with name it the block I want it to go to. So this is going to be for iridium ore, and then I name it loot table. That allows me to much more easily keep track of everything within MCreator. So we want to create our new loot table, and here we go. So you have your loot table registry, which is what you want it to be for. So this is part of the blocks loot table type, and it is for a block called iridium ore. There we go. We're already done. We do not need to give it a loot table registry because it just automatically determined that it did not need the loot table at the end of it. We want it for the mod namespace because it is for our modded ore. You could also use this to modify or change loot tables for vanilla Minecraft stuff. I will cover loot tables in more detail in a future tutorial. Loot table type, this just allows you to change what the loot table is for. So if you want to add it to a specific entity, generic, so on and so forth. But for this example, we just need blocks. So there we go. We've set up all the important stuff we need for this to work for iridium ore. So now is the actual loot table itself. So we want this to always drop an iridium ore every single time. You can set that up just going through the block properties. You can set it up in there. But if you want this to be much more expandable and much more accurately work with fortune or silk touch and so on and so forth, you can set this up here. So we want to make it to where this is going to give us raw iridium. We want an entry weight of 1 because it's our only item here, so we don't really need an entry weight. How many do you want it to drop? This will always drop 1 no matter what if you have the minimum and maximum at 1. But you could also set this if you want it to function like coal. You could have a minimum of 1, maximum of 8, for example. Or if we're going with coal, I think it's 2, and lapis is, I think, 8, and same with redstone. But this allows you to choose what range or the range of numbers you get from a particular ore. So every time you break at the current settings right there with a minimum of 1, maximum of 4, every time you mine iridium ore, you can get 1 to 4 ore per attempt. But we just want it total of 1. Do you want it to be affected by fortune? So yes, we want it to be affected by fortune so we can get more ore. You could also make it to where fortune does not actually get you more ore. Enable the explosion decay of the particular item. And do you want it to get how you want it to function with silk touch? And then entry item enchantments level, that is not needed for the actual what we are using, so it can be ignored. At the top of the loot table, you have the total number of rolls you want it to do in your whole loot table, and then you can also enable a certain amount of bonus rolls. We don't need any of that because we're not worried about that. We're just setting up a basic ore, so we don't need a fancy loot table. We currently have our iridium ore that when we mine it, we get 1 chunk of iridium, raw iridium, or if we have fortune, we can get more. And that's it. We now have our iridium loot table. Let's head back into Minecraft and see it in action. And here we are back within Minecraft looking at our iridium ore. So let us put it to the actual test. Wooden pickaxe, we get nothing because we do not meet the requirement. Next, stone pickaxe, nothing because we do not meet the iron requirement. Now, iron pickaxe, mine it, 1 raw iridium because we now meet the requirement. Same with diamond and netherite. So now to test if our fortune actually works, we can do /enchant dev fortune 3. So let's mine it. Let's see how many ore we can get out of 1 with a fortune 3. That's 1 ore. That was 3. 1. So fortune is working with our ore. And there you go. That is how you add 1 new ore to the game and added a loot table to much more easily control its drops and allow for it to technically drop more than 1 item. So if you wanted to replicate something like say a random ore, like the randomonium ore, you could set it up with the loot table and just add all the ores you want your randomonium ore to drop you. But with that being said, that concludes our blocks and ores tutorial. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.